He needed a wool worker, not a wife. But the plus-size woman changed his life forever. The sheep were dying. Not all of them. Not yet. But Owen Fletcher had already lost 4 in the past 2 weeks. And if he did not get the wool processed before the weather turned, he would lose the income that kept the other 60 alive through winter. He knew this the way he knew everything about his farm. Not as a thought, but as a weight pressed flat against his chest every morning when he opened his eyes. He stood at the window of the stone farmhouse, looking out at the hills. The hills looked back. They always did. Pale green, cold, indifferent. He had lived among them for 31 years and he still could not decide whether they were beautiful or merely large. He had been alone for 16 months. He did not count the days. He counted other things. Bales, feed bags, the number of steps from the house to the barn. 72 in dry weather. 74 when the mud was bad and he had to walk wide of the low patch near the gate. He counted because counting was useful, and Owen Fletcher had no patience for things that were not useful. His wife, Carol, had died of a heart condition that nobody caught until it was too late. She had been 49 years old. She had been the kind of woman who laughed at things that were not technically funny, who kept the books with obsessive precision, and who knew how to grade raw fleece by touch alone. She had been, in most practical terms, the reason the farm worked. Owen did not think about that often. When he did, he counted roof tiles. He had 47 roof tiles visible from the yard. He knew the number without looking. The notice he posted was 4 lines long. He had typed it on his nephew's phone, deleted it twice, retyped it, and sent it before he could talk himself out of the whole business. Experienced wool worker needed. Room and board provided. No frills, no nonsense. Serious inquiries only. He did not say please. He did not say the farm was struggling. He did not say that the spare bedroom had been clean and empty for 16 months, and that some mornings the silence in the house was so complete, he could hear the clock in the kitchen ticking from the upstairs hallway. He said what needed saying and nothing more. He expected 3 replies. He got 11. Most of them were from men who had never touched a fleece in their lives and were simply looking for a free roof. He could tell within a sentence. He wrote back to none of them. The 12th reply was different. It came on a Thursday morning, plain and direct, no preamble. The woman wrote that she had 10 years of textile experience, that she had worked wool processing in a facility in Yorkshire before the factory replaced her entire department with machinery, that she was looking for stable work with accommodation, and that she had no interest in positions that were going to disappear in 6 months. She wrote that she was reliable, capable, and not the sort of person who needed to be managed. Owen read it twice. He wrote back, "Can you start next week?" She replied within the hour, "Yes, I need the address and the nearest train station." He gave her both. He did not ask her name until the reply came back. She signed it simply, Helen Ward. He did not think about what she might look like. He was not hiring for how someone looked. He was hiring because 60 sheep needed their wool processed before the cold settled in for good, and because the accounts could not absorb another season of paying the commercial processing depot their fees. He needed someone who knew the work. That was the sum total of his concern. He was wrong about that, though he would not discover it for some time. Helen Ward arrived on a Saturday morning in late September. Owen heard the taxi before he saw it, a diesel engine complaining up the long gravel track that served as his driveway. He came out of the barn and stood in the yard with his hands in his jacket pockets. The taxi stopped. The door opened. Helen Ward stepped out, and she was not what he had pictured, though he would have struggled to say what he had pictured. She was a large woman, broad through the shoulders and hips, with thick dark hair pulled back without ceremony, and a face that had clearly made its peace with the cold a long time ago. She was carrying 2 bags, one in each hand, and she looked at the farmhouse the way a surveyor looks at a property, systematically, without sentiment, starting at the roof and working down. She paid the taxi driver without fumbling for the money. She had it ready. Owen noticed that. She picked up both bags and walked toward him. She stopped 2 feet away, put both bags down, and looked at him directly. "Owen Fletcher?" she said. "Yes." "Helen Ward. She glanced past him at the barn. Is that where the fleeces are? Part of them. The rest are in the shed beside it. She nodded. I'll get settled. Then you can show me the setup. Right, he said. She picked up her bags and walked into the house. Owen stood in the yard for a moment. He looked at the barn, then at the house, then at the barn again. He counted the fence posts along the near paddock. Got to 14 before he went inside. The spare bedroom was at the end of the upstairs hall, small, with a window that faced the east hill. Carol had kept it tidy without being asked, which meant it was still tidy now, because Owen had not touched it. Helen set her bags on the floor, looked at the window for a moment, then turned and came back downstairs before he had finished filling the kettle. Show me the fleeces, she said. He showed her. She moved through the barn without speaking, lifting fleeces, checking fiber, pressing the wool between her fingers with the particular focus of someone who had done it 10,000 times and was now calibrating for a new source. She did not perform competence. She simply had it, and it showed in how her hands moved, unhurried and certain. She found the fleece that had been improperly skirted near the back of the second pile. She held it up. These weren't done right, she said. I know, Owen said. I did those myself. She looked at him. I can see that. She set it aside without judgment and moved on. He stood there for a moment. Carol had once told him he did not take criticism particularly well. He was finding, to his vague surprise, that Helen Ward's version of criticism was so flat and factual that there was nothing to take personally. He showed her the carding equipment, the washing basin, the drying racks, the storage system for sorted fleeces. She asked 3 questions. They were precise. She did not ask anything twice. When they went back into the house, he put a mug of tea on the table. She sat down and drank it without ceremony. You'll need to show me where everything is in the kitchen, she said. I'll manage my own meals. I don't expect you to cook for me. I wasn't planning to, he said. She looked at him over the mug. There was something in her face. Not amusement exactly, but in that neighborhood. Good, she said. He sat down with his own tea. There was a second chair at the table, the one Carol had used. It had been in the same position for 16 months. He had moved everything else in the house at least once, straightening and reorganizing in the vague, restless way of someone who needed to feel that something was changing. He had not moved that chair. Helen Ward looked at it once. She looked at him. She looked at the chair again. Then she picked it up, quietly and without comment, and moved it to the wall beside the dresser. Owen stared at the space where it had been. His chest did something complicated that he had no name for, and did not try to find one. He counted the tiles on the kitchen floor. Got to 31. Helen finished her tea and put her mug in the sink. What time do you start in the morning? She said. 6, he said. Fine. She dried her hands on the dish towel and went upstairs. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet from the one Owen had been living in for 16 months. It had a texture to it now. The faint sound of drawers opening upstairs. A floorboard settling under someone's weight. The small, particular sounds of a house that has a person in it. He sat at the table for a long time. He did not count anything. That was new. The kitchen window had gone dark before he moved. He got up, rinsed his mug, turned off the light, and went to bed. Outside, the hills were enormous and still, and the first real cold of autumn had begun to come down off them without hurry, feeling its way toward the valley the way cold always does, patient, inevitable, taking its time. Owen lay in the dark and listened to the farmhouse settle. 60 sheep in the paddock. 16 months of silence. 2 suitcases at the end of the upstairs hall. He did not sleep for a long time. But the ceiling had nothing useful to tell him, so eventually he stopped staring at it. In the morning, she was already in the barn. He checked his watch. It was 5:47. He stood in the barn doorway for a moment, watching her work in the gray early light, her hands moving through the fleece with that same unhurried certainty, and he felt something he had not felt in 16 months. Not hope. He would not have known what to do with hope. Something more practical than that. Something closer to the particular relief of a man who has been carrying something very heavy and has just been told he does not have to carry it alone today. He put his jacket on and went to work. The carding combs had been catching for 3 weeks before Helen fixed them. Owen had not mentioned it. He had been managing around the problem the way farmers manage around small structural failures, working with the damage, rerouting the effort, adding time to a process that was already too slow. He had told himself he would deal with it after the main fleece processing was done, then after the winter check on the fencing, then after the younger ewes were sorted. He had not dealt with it. On the 4th morning after Helen's arrival, he came into the barn to find the carding combs laid out on the workbench in careful order, cleaned, the bent tines straightened, the clogged teeth cleared. She had used a fine wire tool he did not know he owned. He had found it in a box in the storage shed some months ago, and had no idea what it was for. Helen was already working at the fleece table, her back to him. She did not explain. She did not mention what she had done. She simply began the day's sorting as though nothing had changed because, for her, nothing had. The combs were broken. She fixed them. That was the complete transaction. Owen stood at the workbench and ran his thumb along the tines. Smooth, clean, everything where it was supposed to be. He said nothing. He picked up his jacket from the hook by the door, went out to check on the sheep, and spent the first 20 minutes of the morning being quietly and specifically embarrassed by how different the combs felt when he used them an hour later. They fell into a rhythm inside of a week, which surprised him. He had expected friction. New arrangements always had friction. Misread expectations, misplaced tools, somebody doing something the wrong way. He had been bracing for it. There was almost none. Helen worked the way he worked, steady, quiet, focused. She did not fill silence with noise. She did not explain her choices. She did not ask him to validate her methods or reassure her that she was doing well. She simply did the work, and she did it right. And over the first 2 weeks, Owen realized that he had been unconsciously holding his shoulders in a kind of permanent brace, waiting for something to go wrong, and it had not gone wrong. He did not relax exactly. Owen Fletcher was not a man built for relaxation. But the brace in his shoulders loosened by degrees, the way a fence post settles into the ground over time. She made her own meals. That had been the agreement. She used one side of the pantry and one shelf in the refrigerator. She cooked in the evenings after the day's work was done. Simple things that smelled good in a way that old stone farmhouses are built to amplify. Onions, spices, something baking. Owen ate his own food at the kitchen table, while she ate at the small counter by the window, and they occupied the kitchen at the same time in easy parallel, without particular conversation. On the 8th evening, she made a double portion of the rice and lentil dish she had been cooking, and left half of it covered on the counter with a small plate on top. She did not mention it. She went to bed. Owen came in from a late check on the sheep, cold and tired, and found it there. He stood looking at it for a moment. He ate his usual thing, bread and cold meat, which was what he generally had in the evenings because it required no thought, and then looked at the covered dish again. He tried it. It was very good. It had actual spices in it, not just salt, which was roughly the extent of his seasoning philosophy. He ate the entire portion, washed the plate, put it back. The next evening, there was extra again. He said nothing. She said nothing. By the end of the 2nd week, it had simply become part of the architecture of the day, without either of them deciding it was. He noticed things about her slowly, the way you notice things about the landscape you live in. Not in one moment of revelation, but in accumulation. She was always up before him. He had started at 6 his entire farming life, and in 31 years on this land, no one had ever beaten him to the barn. Helen Ward was there every morning when he arrived, sometimes already deep in work, sometimes sitting on the stool near the door with her tea, looking out at the paddock. She never looked hurried. She was simply already there. She had strong opinions about fleece grading that differed slightly from his own system, and on the 3rd day she had laid out her method beside his in plain terms and waited for his response. He had looked at both approaches, recognized that hers was more efficient for fine wool, and said so. She had nodded and implemented it without ceremony. She did not gloat. There was nothing in her manner that suggested she had won anything. She had simply identified a better method, and they were both going to use it. He respected that enormously, and would not have said so for anything in the world. She walked the farm every evening before dark. He noticed this at the end of the first week. Saw her moving along the near perimeter in the gray late light, hands in her coat pockets, not hurrying. She was not inspecting. She was not checking anything. She was simply walking. He could not tell what she was thinking, and he did not ask. It seemed like the kind of walking a person does when they need to feel the size of the place they are living in. He remembered Carol doing something similar when they had first moved to the farm. He had asked her what she was doing, and she had said, "Working out if I can make my peace with it." He had asked her what she had decided. She had said, "Ask me in a year." He had asked her a year later. She had laughed and said she had forgotten the question entirely. He did not tell Helen any of this. He went inside and made tea, and did not think about it any further, which was what he generally did with things that had no immediate practical solution. The trouble, if it could be called trouble, and Owen was not yet sure it could, was that Helen Ward was very difficult not to notice. Not in the way that would have embarrassed him to articulate, not that kind of noticing. It was subtler and more disorienting than that. It was the way his attention had started to arrange itself around the fact of her presence without his permission. When he was in the barn, he was aware of whether she was in the barn. When the kitchen light was on in the evening, he knew it. When she was not where he expected her to be, he noticed the absence the way you notice a sound that has stopped. He counted fence posts about it. Got to 30. The second week produced its own small revelation. He came in from the East Field late on a Wednesday afternoon to find her at the kitchen table, with the farm accounts open in front of her. Not his accounts. She had not gone into his things, but the invoice file he had left on the table 3 days ago and had been meaning to deal with. He stopped in the doorway. She looked up. She did not look caught. "The depot is overcharging you," she said. "They've been billing you for grade B processing on wool that should be classified grade C. It's been going on for at least 2 invoices. Could be longer if you have older files." She turned the invoice around so he could see. There, and there. He came to the table. He looked. She was right. He had been so worn down for so long, managing everything alone, that he had stopped reading the invoices properly. He had been paying them and filing them, and that was as far as his capacity had stretched. He did not say any of this. "I'll call them tomorrow," he said. "I'd do it in writing," she said. "Easier to document." "Right." He hung his jacket on the hook. "Thank you." She closed the invoice file and pushed it toward him, and went back to her corner of the kitchen counter. He stood at the table for a moment, looking at the invoice. The amount they owed him back, if the past 6 months were all similarly miscalculated, was not nothing. He thought about the 4 sheep he had lost this season. He thought about the weeks he had spent wondering whether he could afford the winter feed supplement. He thought about the way he had been quietly and doggedly managing toward a cliff edge he was trying very hard not to look at directly. He thought about a woman who had been in his house for 2 weeks and had, without fanfare, straightened the carding combs, improved the grading system, fed him actual food, and found money he did not know he was owed. He counted the knots in the kitchen table. 7. He sat down and opened the invoice file and read every line. That night she was at the barn later than usual, finishing a batch of sorted fleece that she had wanted to complete before a weather change she had predicted based on the way the light had looked at 4 in the afternoon. Owen came to check that the barn doors were properly secured, and found her still working. "You don't need to stay," he said. "I want to finish this batch," she said. "The humidity will affect it if I leave it overnight with that weather coming." He looked at the batch. She was right about the weather. He could feel it too. He picked up the second pair of grading pads from the hook on the wall. "I'll do the other half," he said. She looked at him. Something shifted in her face. Brief, controlled, quickly put away. "All right," she said. They worked side by side for the next hour in the barn's quiet light, the sound of the wind picking up outside, the sheep settled and still in the paddock, the batch of fleece moving through their hands at twice the speed it would have moved through one pair alone. Owen could not remember the last time he had worked alongside someone. He did not examine this thought. He let it sit where it had landed, the way you leave a bird alone when it lands near you. Very still, very careful, afraid of what happens if you move. The batch was done by 9. She covered the sorted bales, secured the ties, and put the tools back in their places. He checked the doors. They walked back to the house in the dark without speaking. At the kitchen door, she stopped and looked up at the sky. "It'll rain by morning," she said. "Yes," he said. She went inside. He stood in the yard for a moment in the dark, listening to the wind come down off the hills. He did not count anything. That was the second time. He noticed that too. The rain came before morning, as Helen had said it would. Owen heard it against the roof at around 3 in the morning, and lay still for a moment in the dark, listening. A good soaking rain after the dry September they had was not unwelcome. The pasture needed it. The ground had been too hard at the edges of the low field, the kind of hard that tells you the soil is tired and thirsty without knowing how to ask. He got up at 5 instead of 6 because there was no going back to sleep in a house with a metal roof and honest rain, and he went down to make tea, and Helen was already in the kitchen. She was standing at the window with her mug, watching the rain come across the hills. She was wearing a heavy knitted cardigan over her work clothes, her hair still loose from sleep, and she turned when she heard him on the stairs. "I thought you'd be up early," she said. "Roof," he said. "Yes." She looked back at the window. "The east field will be soft along the drainage line. The sheep won't go near the corner post. They never like the mud, but you'll want to check the post itself is still properly seated. Rain this heavy can shift the ground around a post that's been standing in dry soil." He looked at her. He had been checking that same corner post every wet season for 11 years. He had not mentioned it to her. He had not mentioned most of the farm's small peculiarities, because there had been no reason to. She had come to process wool, not to learn the land. But she had learned the land anyway. In 7 weeks, she had walked it enough, watched it enough, paid it enough attention to know where its weak points were. He filled his mug. "I'll check it this morning," he said. "I'll come," she said. He did not tell her it was not necessary. He had learned by now that telling Helen Ward when something was not necessary was a conversation that went nowhere. She had her own counsel on necessity. They went out together after breakfast, in waterproof coats and boots, and walked the Eastfield perimeter while the rain fell steadily around them. The sheep were bunched near the upper slope, sensible animals, keeping clear of the wet ground. The drainage line was running freely, which was good. The corner post, when Owen got his hands on it and tested it, was solid. But the gate latch beside it had shifted, a 1/4 inch out of true, which meant it would catch in cold weather and freeze by January into something that would not open without a mallet. He had not noticed it. Helen was looking at it with her hands in her coat pockets. She said nothing. She did not point it out. She waited. He crouched down and examined the fitting. He would need to drill it back, reset the bolt, probably add a sleeve to the housing before the real cold came. He stood up. "I'll sort it this week," he said. She nodded. They walked back. That was the thing about her that he found most confusing, if confusing was the right word, which he was not sure it was. She never pressed. She never followed a useful observation with commentary about why it mattered, or what he should have done, or how long it had probably been that way. She pointed, or, more often, simply waited near the thing so that he found it himself, and then she let it go. Carol had been different. Carol had been a woman of complete sentences, thorough reasoning, the whole explanation delivered with efficiency, and not unkindly. He had loved this about her. It had been useful. He had always known where he stood. Helen operated differently. She used fewer words than anyone he had ever met, and somehow each one landed exactly where it was meant to. He thought about this on and off through the morning as he worked in the barn, running fleeces through the carting equipment that now moved the way it was supposed to move, smooth and unresisting. It was the third week of October when the ankle happened. He was in the barn when he heard the sound. Not loud, just a sharp intake of breath from the direction of the yard. The particular kind of sound that a person makes when they have hurt themselves and are trying not to announce it. He came out of the barn fast. Helen was standing near the stone step at the yard edge. She had one hand braced against the wall of the barn. She was looking at the ground with the expression of someone doing a precise internal inventory. He covered the distance between them without thinking about it. "What happened?" "The step," she said. "It's slicker than it looks after rain. My left foot went." She paused. "It's fine. It's not serious." "Can you put weight on it?" She tried. Not quite. He saw it in her face. The careful test. The brief flinch. The jaw setting. He was already beside her. His hand went to her arm, steadying, without permission asked or given, because permission is not the first thing a person thinks of when someone is about to fall. She did not fall. She steadied against his grip, took a breath, and carefully shifted her weight back to the right foot. "It's a twist," she said, "not a break. I know the difference." "How do you know the difference?" "Because I've done both." She looked at his hand on her arm. He let go immediately, stepped back to an appropriate distance. She straightened her coat. "I'll be all right by tomorrow. I just need to stay off it today." "You'll stay off it today," he said. She looked at him. "I just said that." "I know. I'm confirming it." Something moved across her face. That might have been the beginning of a smile. She looked away before he could be sure. He helped her inside. Not carrying her. She was not the sort of woman you carried. She made that clear with the angle of her shoulder. But steadying, one hand at her elbow, close enough to catch if the step caught her again. She made it to the kitchen chair without difficulty. He put the kettle on. She was looking at her boot, deciding something. "I can get that," he said. "I can manage," she said. "Helen." She looked up. He crouched down, unlaced the boot, and eased it off carefully. She said nothing. Her expression was very controlled, the kind of control that is its own kind of telling. The ankle was already showing color at the outer edge. Not terrible. She was right. A twist, not a break. He had done enough of both himself to know. He put a cold compress on it without asking, a clean cloth from the drawer wrapped around the ice pack from the freezer, and set it in place with the calm efficiency of a man who is not sure what he is feeling, and has therefore chosen to feel useful instead. She held the compress in place. She looked at him. "Thank you," she said. "It was a bad step," he said. "I should have fixed it before now. I should have watched where I was putting my foot." "You should be able to walk across your own yard without watching where you put your foot," he said. She went quiet. He realized, a moment too late, what he had said. "Your own yard." He stood up. He went to make the tea. He kept his back to her for longer than was strictly necessary, giving the kettle a great deal of attention. "Owen," she said. "Tea's nearly ready," he said. She did not push it. She was never the sort to push. He brought her the tea and sat down across the table. They sat in the kitchen with the rain still going outside, the hills invisible in the gray, and neither of them spoke for a while. But it was not the old silence, the one that had lived in this house before she arrived. It was a different thing, warmer maybe, or simply occupied. Two people in a room, both aware of the other, neither pretending otherwise. He did the barn work alone that afternoon. He also fixed the step. He used a cold chisel to key the stone surface, adding grip lines in a crosshatch pattern that would hold even when the weather was at its worst. It took him about 40 minutes. He did it carefully, more carefully than the job strictly required, and he did not ask himself why. When he came in at 5, she was at the kitchen table with the farm accounts, her ankle elevated on the second chair, the one she had moved to the wall on her first day, which she had retrieved without comment, for the purpose of using it as a footrest. She had a cup of tea beside her and she was making a note in the margin of one of his account pages. He stood in the doorway. "The depot wrote back," she said. I drafted a letter for you in the morning before my foot decided to misbehave. It's on the counter. You should read it before you send it. Change anything you want." He looked at the counter. A single page, handwritten, clear and direct. He read it. It was better than anything he would have written. It was calm and precise, and allowed for no ambiguity about the amount owed or the timeline for resolution. He stood there with the letter in his hand and had the sudden, clear, slightly disorienting thought that this woman had, in the space of 7 weeks, fixed his equipment, improved his process, found money he was owed, managed the accounts more carefully than he had in 2 years, and was now sitting at his kitchen table with an injured ankle drafting his correspondence. And she had done all of it without being asked, and without once making him feel diminished by any of it. He folded the letter once, unfolded it. "I'll send it tomorrow," he said. She nodded and went back to the accounts. He made dinner, both portions. He put hers on the table beside her without discussion. She looked at it, then at him. "You cooked," she said. "You have a bad ankle," he said. "And you wrote my correspondence." She picked up the fork. He sat down with his own plate. They ate together at the kitchen table for the first time, not across the room from each other in their separate corners, but at the table, at a reasonable distance, like two people who have decided, without formally deciding, that they are no longer strangers. Outside, the rain was still coming off the hills. The sheep were settled and dry in the barn. The corner post was solid. The step was fixed. The depot letter was on the counter. Owen cleared the plates. She stayed at the table, ankle elevated, pen in hand, working through the accounts with the unhurried focus that seemed to be her natural setting for everything. He went to bed. He lay in the dark and did not count roof tiles, did not count anything at all. The quiet was not empty anymore. It had weight. It had another person in it, 1 floor below, and the sound of a pen moving across paper, and the small, domestic, specifically human sound of someone being present in a house. He had not known he missed that sound until he had it back. He had not known it was the thing he was missing, among all the things he was missing. He found out that night, lying very still in the dark, listening. He did not sleep for a long time. But it was not the same kind of sleeplessness as before. Before had been empty and wide, the kind of wakefulness that has nowhere to rest. This was different. This was the sleeplessness of a man with too much to think about. He would have chosen this every time. Owen's nephew arrived on a Friday, unannounced, as he always did. Daniel Fletcher was 27 years old and had an uncanny ability to drive a small car at dangerous speeds up a farm track without scratching it, which Owen had privately considered the most remarkable thing about him for several years. He appeared in the yard at 11:30 on a cold November morning, with a bag of things from the supermarket in town: coffee, biscuits, a good cut of beef because he knew Owen rarely bought anything that nice for himself, and the particular energy of a young man who had recently been thinking about something and was working up to discussing it. Owen saw this energy and recognized it. He said nothing. He had known Daniel since the boy was 4 years old. Helen was in the barn. Owen had learned to keep track of this the same way he kept track of where his tools were. Not as a conscious effort, but as background knowledge, the farm's geography updated to include her. Daniel came inside and put the bag on the counter and said hello and asked how the sheep were, which was always his opening move. A courtesy he had learned from Owen, who considered the sheep the correct starting point for any conversation about the farm. Owen told him about the sheep, the 4 losses in September, the improvement since, the way the pasture had recovered after the October rain. Daniel listened and nodded, and made tea without being asked, because he had been visiting this kitchen since he was small, and knew where everything was. "I saw you had someone in the barn," Daniel said, not casually enough. "Wool worker," Owen said. "Helen Ward. She started in late September." "Right." Daniel poured the tea. "Is she good?" "Yes," Owen said. "Better than the last one?" "I never had a last one. I've always done it myself." Daniel turned around. "You hired someone." "The season required it." "Right." He handed Owen his mug. He sat down at the table. He was quiet for a moment, which was uncharacteristic. Daniel was, as a rule, not quiet. She seemed like she's settling in all right. Owen looked at him. She's a wool worker, not a house guest. I know that. A pause. I'm just asking. She's competent, Owen said. She does the work. Right. Another pause, longer. Daniel turned his mug in a slow circle on the table. Uncle Owen. Don't. I haven't said anything yet. You're about to say something. Daniel looked at him. The younger man had his mother's eyes, Owen's sister's eyes, which were direct and a little relentless. Is she staying past the season? Owen was quiet. The wool processing will be done by January, Daniel said. What happens then? That's a January question, Owen said. It's a November question, if you want to have time to think about it. Owen stood up and went to the window. The hill was its usual impassive self. The barn roof was visible at the edge of his sight. He could not see into the barn from here. He counted the fence posts again. Got to 14. Same as always. She's good at the work, he said. She's efficient. She's reorganized the storage, improved the grading system, caught an error in the depot billing that's going to get me money back. I'm not asking about the work, Daniel said. I know. A long silence. She moved Carol's chair, Owen said. He had not planned to say this. He did not know where it came from. Daniel went very still. The one at the table, Owen said. First day she arrived. Moved it to the wall. Didn't say anything about it. Just moved it. He looked at the wall. The chair was still there, pushed to the side, out of the way of the everyday traffic of the kitchen. He had not moved it back. He was not going to move it back. I stood there like an idiot for about 5 minutes. What did you feel? Daniel asked. Owen gave him a flat look. What did you think? Daniel corrected. I thought it was a reasonable thing to do, Owen said. The chair was in the way. The room has 2 people in it now. He paused. I thought that was a very particular kind of sense to have. Moving the thing that needed moving without making a production of it. Daniel was quiet, watching him. She's not Carol, Owen said. He said it plainly, the way he said everything. Not as a defense, not as a wound, just as a fact that needed stating. I'm not looking for Carol. Carol was Carol. You don't replace a person. No, Daniel said. But the house was. Owen stopped. He pressed his mouth closed. Was what? Daniel said carefully. Owen looked at the kitchen. At the pot on the stove from last night's dinner, hers, washed and upturned on the drying rack. At the draft letter from the depot sitting in the folder he had made for it, with her handwriting visible on the top sheet. At the farm account book that now had small, precise penciled annotations in the margins that had not been his idea. Empty, he said. It was empty. Daniel did not say anything. And then it wasn't, Owen said. He picked up his mug. He drank the last of the tea. That's all. Daniel looked at him for a long time in the way that young people look at older ones when they are trying to decide whether to say the obvious thing. He seemed to conclude that the obvious thing did not need saying. Will you ask her to stay? He said instead. Owen put the mug in the sink. I'm going to check on the Eastfield drainage, he said. That's not an answer. It's a November answer, Owen said. He put his coat on and went out. He did not go to the Eastfield. He went to the barn. Helen was at the grading table. She looked up when he came in, read his face with the efficiency she applied to most things, and looked back at her work. Your nephew is here, she said. Yes. I heard the car. She separated a fleece section with practiced hands. Good that he visits. He's forward, Owen said. He asks questions directly. That's not always a bad quality, she said. No. He stood near the barn door. He asked if you were staying past the season. She was quiet. She did not stop working. I told him that was a January question, Owen said. She turned a fleece section over, examined it. Is it? She said. He looked at her. She was not looking at him. Helen, he said. She put the fleece down and turned. She looked at him with the direct, unhurried patience that was her standard register, and waited. "I didn't post that notice looking for anything except someone to process wool," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not the sort of man who goes looking for things. I manage what's in front of me." "I know," she said. "I'm telling you because the situation has become—" He stopped. He searched for the word. Unclear. Something happened in her face. Not much. A very small shift. "For you?" she said. "Or for me?" He held her gaze. He did not look away. But he also did not answer, because the honest answer was that he did not fully know yet, and he had spent 31 years on this farm learning that the things you say before you fully know them are the things you have to explain later. She nodded once. She picked up the fleece. She went back to work. He went back to the house. Daniel was still at the table. He looked at Owen, and read his face with the same efficiency Helen had, which Owen found vaguely irritating, given that he was not aware of his face doing anything. "Well?" Daniel said. "I said what I had to say," Owen said. "And?" "And nothing. And the rest of it is its own business in its own time." Daniel picked up his mug. He was quiet. Then, "She's not going anywhere, you know." "You don't know that. You just met her." "I know the difference," Daniel said, "between someone who is waiting to leave and someone who has decided to stay." He looked at Owen. "She's decided to stay. She just hasn't decided in what capacity." Owen said nothing. "Ask her to stay," Daniel said. "Properly, with whatever terms make sense. Before the season ends and you both have to pretend it was only ever about the wool." Owen went to the window. The hill. The fence line. The barn roof. "The east field drainage," he said again. "Uncle." He went outside. He walked the farm for 40 minutes in the cold November air, which was not technically checking the east field drainage, but which covered most of the same ground. He walked the north perimeter and the lower pasture, and the stretch of track between the barn and the storage shed. He walked the way Helen walked in the evenings, without hurry, hands in his pockets, simply feeling the size of the place. He had run this farm for 31 years. He had built most of the storage shed himself. He had replaced the barn roof twice. He had outlasted 4 hard winters and 1 catastrophic spring flood, and 16 months of complete solitude. And he had done all of it because the farm was the thing he understood, the thing that required him, the thing that made sense when other things did not. And then, in late September, something else had arrived. Something competent and direct and honest and entirely, stubbornly, specifically itself. Something that moved chairs that needed moving, and fixed combs that needed fixing, and drafted letters that said exactly what needed saying. Something that got up before 6 every morning, and was already in the barn. He stopped at the edge of the near paddock. The sheep looked at him with their usual calm incuriosity. He thought about the ankle, about his hand under her arm, about the way she had said, "Your own yard," and neither of them had known what to do with that. He thought about the empty kitchen, the full one. He thought about the specific sound of someone being present in a house. He walked back in. Helen was still in the barn. He did not go to the barn. He sat at the kitchen table with Daniel and drank another cup of tea and, for the first time in a long time, did not have anything to count. That was how he knew. Not the feeling itself. He was not practiced at feelings. He would not have trusted that. But the absence of the counting, the absence of the need to put numbers between himself and the thing that was happening. The thing had gotten past the counting. It was already on the other side of it. He did not tell Daniel this. He did not need to. Daniel was already grinning, which was answer enough, and Owen was already irritated by the grin, which was its own answer. "When is she done with the main batch?" Daniel asked. "End of December, at the current pace," Owen said. "So you have 6 weeks." "I'm aware." "Don't wait until the last minute." "I have never waited until the last minute for anything in my life," Owen said. Which was entirely true of feed orders and fence repairs and veterinary appointments, and may or may not have been true of this particular situation. And Daniel apparently knew the difference because he said nothing further and went back to his tea. Outside, the cold was settling in for the season. The hill was its same large, indifferent self. The barn light was on. She was in the kitchen when he came down early. Not at the counter, not at the window. She was at the table, both hands around her mug, looking at the middle distance with the expression of a woman thinking something through to its end. It was the 19th of December. He knew the date the way he knew all dates in the farming year, by what it meant in practical terms. 9 days to the end of the month. The main fleece batch was done. The sorted bales were in storage, labeled in her handwriting, which was smaller and neater than his. The depot letter had been answered, the overpayment returned. The accounts were more precisely ordered than they had been in 2 years. The work was done. He sat down across from her. He did not make tea first. He sat down and she looked at him, and he could see that she knew what was coming, not because she was expecting it in any particular form, but because Helen Ward paid attention to things, and she had been paying attention. "I want to ask you to stay," he said. "Not as a wool worker." She looked at him steadily. "I am not good at this," he said. "I want to be clear about that up front, so you're not operating under incorrect information. I am not good at expressing things. I manage the practical side. The practical side I am reliable on." "I know that," she said. "You've been here nearly 3 months," he said. "And I've watched you work. And I've watched you walk this land. And I've eaten your food, which is considerably better than mine. And I've seen you understand this farm more quickly than people who visited it for years." He paused. "I've also watched you be present in this house in a way that has been significant to me. In ways I am not going to overstate, because I think overstatement is dishonest." She was quiet, listening, fully. "I would like you to stay," he said again, "permanently, with proper terms, whatever terms are reasonable to you." He put both hands flat on the table. "I'm not assuming anything. I'm not putting pressure on anything. I'm asking, with the understanding that no is a complete answer." Helen looked at him for a long time. "I have conditions," she said. He felt something unlock in his chest, not dramatically, quietly, the way a latch settles when the door is finally properly aligned. "Tell me," he said. "3," she said. "The first is that this is a partnership, not employment, not charity. If I am here as myself, with my own standing. The books, the decisions, the things that affect both of us, those are shared." "Yes," he said. No hesitation. "The second is that the kitchen is mine as much as it is yours. I reorganize things when I see a better way to organize them, and I don't ask permission. Same with the storage and the work schedule." "That was already happening," he said. "I know. I want it said plainly." "Agreed." She looked at him. The third one cost her something. Not the words, but the decision to say them. He could see it. "The third is that you tell me things," she said. "When something is wrong, when you're worried, when the farm is hard. You don't manage it alone in silence and let me find out from the invoices." She paused. "I know that's not how you're built. I'm not asking you to become someone else. I'm asking you to try." He was quiet for a moment. "I will try," he said. "I can't promise success, but I will try." She nodded once. "Then yes," she said. "I'll stay." He breathed. Just once, evenly. "Do you want more tea?" he said. She looked at him. That thing moved across her face again, the one that was nearly a smile. "Yes," she said. He made it. Both mugs. He set hers on the table, and sat back down, and they sat across from each other in the kitchen, with the winter light coming through the window, thin and pale and cold, the hill the same as always, the barn the same as always, the sheep the same as always, and everything was different. Owen's sister Eleanor came down from Carlisle for the occasion. Daniel came, of course, practically vibrating with the satisfaction of someone who had been right about something, and was exercising restraint about saying so. Helen's sister Patricia drove up from Leeds with her husband and their 2 children. who immediately ran directly at the sheep with the fearless confidence of children who have never lived near sheep, and have therefore not yet learned appropriate respect. The ceremony was small, 14 people, the local officiant, a sensible woman named Ruth, who had been conducting ceremonies in this valley for 20 years, and did not make them longer than necessary, which was something Owen specifically appreciated. Helen wore dark green. He noticed this very clearly. Owen wore his good jacket. Helen had found it in the back of the wardrobe that morning while he was standing there looking at it uncertainly, and she had checked the buttons, found one that was loose, and sewn it back on before breakfast without commentary. He had stood in the doorway of the bedroom watching her do it with the needle and thread she apparently kept in the pocket of her traveling bag. "You carry that?" he said. "Constantly," she said. "Buttons wait for no one." He did not say what he thought then, which was that he suspected he was going to be fine. He did not say it because he had learned, not from Carol, from Helen, that some things are known before they need to be spoken, and speaking them too soon rubs the shine off. Patricia stood next to Helen during the ceremony and held herself very still in the way of a woman trying not to cry in front of people. Eleanor held herself with the opposite posture, rigid and dry-eyed, and Owen knew from 30 years of knowing his sister that this meant the same thing. The rigidity was doing the work that tears would otherwise do. Daniel did not bother to manage himself at all. He simply stood there looking pleased, which was accurate. The ring Owen put on Helen's hand had been Carlyle's, bought the week before with more care than he had given to any single purchase in recent memory. He had gone to 3 shops. He had rejected 2 rings for being too ornate, which he knew without being told she would not like. The one he chose was plain silver, no stone, clean lines. He had been reasonably confident about it. She had looked at it for a long moment when he put it on. "It's right," she said. That was all. That was exactly enough. Afterwards, at the table, Patricia leaned across to Owen and said, "I want you to know she told me, when she first went up there, that she was absolutely certain it was only going to be a job." Owen looked at Helen across the table, who was deep in conversation with Eleanor, and did not hear this. "She was right at the time," Owen said. Patricia laughed. That evening, after everyone had gone, they did the dishes together. The house was quiet, in the way that houses are quiet after they have been full of people. Not empty, but settling, redistributing itself around its usual occupants. Helen washed. Owen dried. This was not a division they had discussed. It had arrived of its own logic. He put the last plate away and folded the dish towel and hung it on the rail. She was looking at the window. The hill outside was dark and still, the stars visible where the clouds had pulled apart after the day's cold. "Patricia thinks I was oblivious," she said. "Were you?" he said. She considered this with appropriate honesty. "Mostly," she said. "Deliberately, a little. I didn't come up here looking for anything except stability." "Neither did I," he said. "No." She looked at the hill a moment longer. "I moved your wife's chair on the first day." He was quiet. "I knew what it meant," she said. "Not who she was, but what the chair being there meant." She turned and looked at him directly. "I thought at the time that I was being practical, making room." "You were," he said. "It needed moving." "Yes." She paused. "But I also wanted to." He looked at her. He looked at the wall where the chair was, the practical chair from the wall, the one she had retrieved for her ankle, which was back in its wall position now. And then at the kitchen table, which had a new chair, broader and solid, with a high, straight back, that he had bought in November from the furniture place in town. He had bought it without explanation. She had not asked for one. She went to bed. He stood in the kitchen for a moment before following, looking at the 2 chairs at the table. The old one, his. The new one, hers, side by side, facing the window where the hill was dark and enormous, and entirely itself. He had loved this farm for 31 years. He had loved Carol for 22. He was not going to compare or measure those things, because they were not competing things. They were different rooms in the same life. which is a thing that only makes sense when you are living it, and does not need to make sense to anyone else. He turned off the kitchen light. He went upstairs. On the landing, he could hear the small sounds of Helen moving in the room that was now theirs, and the sound settled around him the same way it had on the very first night, that particular texture of a house with a person in it. Only now it was permanent. He opened the bedroom door. The bent spoon was in the kitchen drawer. She had brought it from Leeds in her second suitcase, along with her thread and needles, and the heavy cardigan, and 2 farm reference books, and a photograph of Patricia's children, that now stood on the kitchen windowsill. Owen had found the spoon on the first week and said nothing about it, the same way she had said nothing about the corner post or the carding combs, understanding that some objects are not about themselves. He had bought her a new set of spoons in October, a good solid set from the hardware shop that stocked kitchen things in the back. He had put them in the drawer. She had seen them. She had not thrown out the bent one. He had not asked. Some things did not need asking. The farm was the same farm. The hills were the same hills. The sheep, give or take a generation, were the same sheep. But the silence was gone. In its place, footsteps on the landing, the sound of the wind off the hills, a kettle that was always on time, and somewhere in the kitchen drawer, a bent spoon that had come a long way from where it started, and had decided, without ceremony, that it was staying. Owen lay down. The room had weight in it, the good kind. He did not count anything. He had not needed to for some time.